Boom. Can we see if we're going live? There we go. Copy the link. All right. So, link is in the chat. Now, you guys know the deal. I'll see you there. Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Testing and making sure that this is audible. Please make sure that you mute yourself on Zoom so that we can work peacefully on the YouTubes. Test. Fucking Alan. I fucking knew it, man. Alan is like on it. Like, he just won't give up. I respect it. Whoa, Jesus. Step up your game. That's funny. All right. Once again, just make sure you mute yourself on Zoom. I thought I heard something, so maybe just double check if anybody is. All right. So let's get started. I just opened Ableton up, and this is the first thing that you usually see. This is the default screen that you open Ableton up to. All right. So Ableton, again, it's a bit of a different approach to DAWs, right? So when you think about DAWs, you think about something like Pro Tools, where the main goal is to make sure that you can record and mix to the most efficient manner that you can, right? And it's primarily designed based off of the older consoles from the 80s into the 90s and stuff. And then Pro Tools kind of took over and became like the new big industry standard. Now, that being said, a new kind of thought process for DAWs came up when producers and DJs and all started to figure like, hey, Pro Tools is awesome, but like in terms of creation process, it's not very intuitive, it's not very fluid in those kinds of areas. And that's where Ableton starts to come in. And I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I think the people who found Ableton are originally DJs or producers, one or the other. But they had that kind of mindset going in. It's like, we need something that works live, that's fluid, that also helps the creative process. And that's where Ableton kind of comes from. So everything that Pro Tools is born from is like pure engineering, consoles and like recording and preamps and EQs and all that stuff, right? Whereas Ableton is like born from beats and production and DJ sets and triggering stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a completely different approach from the ground up, which is why sometimes when you first get into Ableton, you're like, this is insane and stupid and I don't like it. And I was one of those dudes, right? I was the guy who was like, what the hell is this? Like, I remember when one of my first gigs, first paid engineering gigs, was at a radio station, and they were using Ableton, and I was like, what the fuck is this shit? And it looked horrible, like nasty. It worked completely different. And it wasn't until years later when I started playing around with Ableton that I realized, like, oh shit, not only is this great for creation, but once you see how the plugins work and how racks and routing and all works, you're gonna be like, why would I go back to Pro Tools? I'm just kidding. Everybody's got their own preference, but this shit is very fluid. That's all I want to say. So anyway, you guys can look up in the history and stuff whenever you need to, but just know that it's a pretty different approach to DAWs. What's up, you Glenn? On YouTube, link is in the chat. See you there. So let's get into it. This is the first thing you see whenever you open up Ableton. This is kind of the default screen, right? 2 MIDI tracks, 2 audio tracks, a reverb return, a delay return, and a master. All right. What we're looking at now is called the session view. All right. So you remember in Pro Tools, we had 2 different types of views. We had the mix window and the edit window. So, Mark, if I sound low, you might have to leave Zoom, and don't worry about that. It might just be that your phone is like not able to do both. So I would say leave Zoom and then just come back when we get on that shit again. All right. So in Pro Tools, we had the mix window and the edit window, right? So the mix window was where you had all your faders and your plugins and all that stuff. And the edit window is usually where you would edit the waveforms, right? In Ableton, we have two views, but they're called the session view, which is what we're looking at now. And if you go to the top right corner over here, you'll see 3 horizontal lines and 3 vertical lines. This is kind of the logo for Ableton. The vertical lines indicates the session view. And if you click on the horizontal lines, you see the arrangement view. That's what it's called. It's not called the edit window. It's called the arrangement view. And it's called that because this is where you can arrange your song. It'll make more sense once we get into it, but just know that this is the session view. This is the arrangement view. All right. A couple of other things. You might be wondering, well, why is there a reverb and delay already set up? And this is actually one of the cool things about Ableton is that it has this set up by design, like pre-set up. And the cool thing is that every track, once you have some type of information on it, has a knob and a B knob, which send copies to the reverb and the delay. You guys remember how sends worked in Pro Tools, where you had to add a bus, and then you had to send to the aux, and then you had to make the aux, and then you had to come and click the aux, right? All that stuff. Well, it's already set up in Ableton. Now, you can create more sends and returns if you want to, but just know that this knob is sending a copy of this track to the reverb, and it's also sending a copy to the delay. Anyway, we'll get into that stuff in a bit. Next, let's see what other things we have that's kind of interesting, right? Let's go into the live preferences up here. Let's just go over some basic things. Now, in the look feel section, you might be wondering if my Ableton looks a little different than others. And that's because you have different themes. This is not really a very technical thing, but I fucking love playing around with this shit just based on the mood that I'm in. So if you go to the look and feel tab, not only can you change, language and, track colors and stuff like that. Where's track color? Right, default track colors and things. But also, you can change the theme over here. And right now I'm on mid-dark. And I guess I was in a slightly dark but not so dark mood. You can go light, which is like, holy shit, why are you so happy today? Mid-light, which is like, okay, you're a little, you're smiling a little too much, but, I respect it. And then you have dark mode, which is like, you're just fucking down with the blues, I guess. And then Live 9 is actually the older version of Ableton. You can actually go to that if you want to. Let's go to dark, because fuck it, right? I'm in a dark mood today. Fucking want to, let me not say it on YouTube publicly. Okay, so that's just the look and feel. And it's cool that you can do that because, again, Ableton just has a cool approach to, setting up things. You have your audio tab, which is where you choose your audio interface. Now, the cool thing that I like about Ableton is that, remember in Pro Tools, we had a playback engine where you could choose what your sound card is, whether it was your built-in speakers or your UAD or your Scarlett or whatever it was, right? And that would be your interface for your inputs and your outputs. Now, the cool thing about Ableton is that it allows you to choose different interfaces for input and output. It's not really a big deal, but it's just a little taste of the flexibility that Ableton is starting to give you. And that's one thing that you're going to learn as we do more of this, is that Ableton gives you this really interesting flexibility that Pro Tools really didn't. Pro Tools feels a little bit more on the rigid side and a little bit more on the, I would say a little bit more, less intuitive side. Now, there's a positive in that, which is like you have so many options and so many ways of doing things, and it's kind of based on a console format, which is great. But Anna, that's so nice. I'm totally fine. I'm not in a bad we all have our good days and bad days. We all have our angels and demons. By the way, somebody should use that in their final. We all have our angels and demons. Anyway, this is just a little taste of the flexibility that Ableton's going to start to give you. But what I was saying was, in Pro Tools world, even though some things were a little bit more rigid and a little bit more it took a little bit more work to do because of the whole process and the flexibility and stuff like that. That's awesome. And it allows you a lot of control, right? But Ableton's a little bit more intuitive, and in some ways that's really great because you can kind of get more to the creative side of things. In some ways it's, you know, anyway, I'll let you guys decide, but in some ways it can be a little bit like, oh, I kind of wish I could do that, but whatever. So you have your input device and your output device, and you also have your input and output configuration, which is equivalent to the I/O in Pro Tools, which we've gone over, right? When you go to Setup I/O, you can choose your inputs and outputs and assign them whatever names you want. Now, the cool thing is, look, I have, if you look at my input configuration, my interface has about 30 inputs, right? But if I'm only talking into the microphone and maybe plugging in one or two more instruments, I don't need to have all these others activated. So, you know, when you pull up the input list, let me just hit OK. If I go to an audio track and I click on right here is where it says audio from, which is your input. Remember, you get audio from somewhere, which means you're receiving it, which means it's an input, right? Audio from external input, which is my interface. And when I click on it, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 inputs, and that can be chosen as either mono tracks or stereo tracks. It's up to you how you want to use it, right? But that being said, if I went to my input configuration and started activating all my inputs, let's just do the mono ones for now, right? Check it out. I go back to my audio from external input, and now I have a whole list of other ones which were hidden before. This is not really a big deal, right? Because, like, you know, again, yeah, it's dope, but you know, whatever. But at the same time, if you're into like making things look neat and tidy and not letting a lot of things get in the way of staying creative and excited about things, this is really kind of a game changer, right? Okay, so not sure why you don't have to come back to the Zoom if you're already on YouTube, but okay. What do you get when you cross a J with a beat? A J No, stop. Give G his publishing. Guys are too much. That looks like oh, yeah. So Alan, yeah. So there's some similarities, and I think you're going to see more of them as we get into it. So that's pretty dope that you notice that. I never use Machine too much, but you'll see the similarities. You got your sample rates, as usual. You've got your buffer size. Again, this is all very similar to Pro Tools. Now the buffer size, like I said, same rules apply. Smaller buffer size for recording, larger buffer size for mixing, right? And especially when you get into heavy plugins, right? The cool thing about Ableton that I like is that you see an input latency and an output latency. Input latency is the time lag between an input and once it's received by the DAW, and obviously the output latency is the time difference between the note in the DAW hitting the output, right? So, and then obviously the input plus the output latency will give you the overall latency, right? When we talk about latency, usually when somebody says latency, they're talking about both input plus output, but Ableton just shows you that there's an input latency that's a certain amount versus an output latency, and you can distinguish between the two and figure out the sum of them. It's pretty dope. Now, just to prove my point, even though I've already proven this in a different way, this is a really good way to understand why we have buffer size for different reasons. So check it out. Right now, the overall latency is 12 milliseconds. That's like nothing. That's like less than a transient speed, right? Very, 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 very low. Now, if I click on samples, the buffer size, and I change it to 1020, look at that. Now the overall latency is 53 milliseconds, which is very significant, right? So if I speak, I would actually hear a da-da, 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 right? A delay, a latency in my voice, right? So for that reason, we record at lower buffer sizes and we mix at higher buffer sizes because you need higher buffer sizes so that when you got heavy plugins and all that processing and everything, you want to be able to make sure that your computer can handle it and give it enough time to process everything before it spits it out. Now, another cool thing about the audio tab in the preferences is that there's a test tone. All right, this is pretty standard when you're trying to calibrate your speakers, or whether you're just trying to like see if you're getting sound from your DAW, right? So it's under test. There's a test tone. Right now it's off, but if I turn it on, you hear a sine tone, right? It's an A440 sine tone that you can use to make sure that your DAW is outputting volume. You can also use it to calibrate speakers if that's what you're doing. And you can change the tone volume by just sliding up and down. And you can change the frequency. You guys like that? All right. So I think it's really cool that you can do something like that. And there's a CPU usage simulator, which just kind of lets you test how sturdy and resilient your CPU is, right? So I don't know if you noticed, but when I turned this on, this went right to 50, right? And I can change this to whatever I want. It's just a cool way to see what your system can handle and what it can't. Hell no. Hell no. Hey, somebody find that fucking hell no, that fucking meme, because I've been trying to figure out where that originally came from. All right. Next, let's just take a really quick look at the link tempo MIDI tab. Now, this is usually set up by default whenever you plug in your device, but if you have a device that doesn't show up automatically, you can actually choose your control surface from a predetermined list. So if you have what's the most popular one? The MPK, right? MPKs, right? They're all down here. Or if you have launch pads, right? They're all selectable over here. But you can see that I have an impulse, and it's automatically being detected over here. Now, you have to make sure, if you want to use it in a creative sense, you want to make sure that track and remote is on. All right? So track... I always get confused, but track is for detecting keys, and remote, I believe, is for detecting knobs and sliders. Believe so. I want to make sure. Sending live MIDI. I'll make sure of that, but I'm pretty sure track is for notes and remote is for sliders and knobs and stuff. But yeah, it's a really cool way to just make sure your MIDI interface is being detected. Now, the ones you use at school will automatically be detected, so it's pretty dope. But there you go. That's some stuff about the preferences that I kind of wanted to get out of the way. Let's go back to the session view. So again, this is called the session view. When you go to the top right corner and click on the horizontal lines, this is the arrangement view. Now, the shortcut to go in between the two views is the tab key on your keyboard. So if you press tab, you can quickly go through the two views. All right. Now, you might be wondering, well, this arrangement view looks exactly like the edit window in Pro Tools, and the truth is, it really is very much the same. And you can use Ableton just like a standard DAW. You can record on here, edit on here. You can add plugins on each of the tracks, exactly, and not even use the session view. You don't even have to use the session view if you don't want to. You can do everything right here just like you would in Pro Tools. But we'll get to that. All right, now let's go over a couple of things on the screen, right? So the link is really for when you have multiple devices running Ableton, and this is really more for like a DJ live setting. What'll happen is, well, actually, if you hover over anything in Ableton, at the bottom right over here, you'll see a little info view. So if you're curious about it, here's what it says. Toggle to turn link on and off. When link is enabled, the button will update to show how many other link-enabled devices are connected. Note that turning link on will turn... If start, stop, sync is enabled in the preferences, start and stop commands will be synced across connected apps that have the start, sync, stop enabled. So hopefully that made sense, right? So if you have multiple devices and you want to be able to control multiple devices with multiple with a single control, you can link them together. It's pretty cool, but it's really more for like live settings and not really something we get into. So there you go. The tap is similar to your Pro Tools when you're trying to find the tempo. If you don't know what a tempo is, or you're trying to figure out what a tempo is, or you want to get something to a certain tempo, you can actually tap on this and you'll see that the tempo right next to it will change as well, right? So the tempo of the project is over here, right? The tap is over here if you want to be able to tap out your tempo. A very, very common thing to do, especially in a live setting when you're trying to figure stuff out. If there are any people who DJ in here, you'll definitely understand what I'm talking about when you're trying to figure out tap tempos for whatever the next thing is or the next person's thing is. Hopefully some of you know what I'm talking about. All right. So then you have... well, let's skip these two. Again, this is more for like linked devices, and it's more for when you have multiple Abletons set up simultaneously. So I'm going to skip these two, and it's basically when you have multiple projects open and you need to quickly nudge tempo up or down to make sure that it's in sync with the other person. All right. Next, you have the time signature. You already know what this is: 4/4, 3/4, whatever you want. And right next to that is the tempo, or the metronome, sorry. The metronome. Right now it's disabled, right? You can see it's a little black and white dot. Now if I click on it, it's enabled, and when I hit play, we can hear our tempo, right? And it's going at 120. So if I turn this up, right, to 180, tempo, metronome goes faster. Now, to the right of the metronome, right next to it, there's a little pull-down menu, right? This is really cool because this is where you can set your count in, right? So if you need like 1 bar or 2 bars before you actually record, you can choose to have a count in before it starts recording, right? So, for example, if I'm here and I hit record, see? There was a 4 count before, or 1 bar count before it started recording. Or if I set it to 2 bars, 1, 2, start, right? So the count up, you guys know this from Pro Tools, hopefully. Next, you have the sound. You can change it from classic, which is this, to click, to wood, right? It's kind of based on your preference, but I will say that if you're recording like jazz, classical music, vocals sometimes, like very sensitive vocals or very like delicate vocals, it's pretty standard to put this click on because it bleeds a lot less through the headphones, because you hear that the other ones have like a pitch and a tone to them, right? And so if that's for some reason picked up by the microphone, you can really spoil a take, which is really disappointing. So a lot of classical people will usually choose this, right? Not only is that, atonal basically, but also if it was for some reason picked up by the microphone, it is infinitely easier to get rid of that stuff. All right, so you got your count in, you got your sound, you got your rhythm. Rhythm is basically how fast do you want the tempo, what division do you want the metronome to be at? So do you want it to be quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, etc., etc. So right now we're at quarter notes, right? Can change it to half notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. Ooh, that's fucking eighth note triplets right there. I fucking love that. So yeah, you can choose your division, which is pretty cool. And then another cool thing that I personally enjoy is at the very bottom, there's an option to enable the metronome only while you're recording, right? This is a super useful tool because sometimes you'll be listening back to a song and a mix, and you'll have the metronome going on, and you're going to be like, oh, I got to go turn it off and turn it back on when I need to record. Very frustrating. And sometimes you can bounce mixes with metronomes on, and people do it, and it's something you got to be really careful about. Don't forget that in Pro Tools you have to mute your metronome. But here, if you click on Enable Only While Recording, you see that I'm playing right now, and there's no metronome. But if I hit Record, then the metronome starts. I find that extremely valuable, and I think every DAW should implement that personally. But you're going to hear me say that a lot while we're in Ableton. There's a lot of amazing things. Okay, so let's take a look at before we get into these, let's take a look at the arrangement view a little bit. It looks kind of similar to the edit view, and it looks like it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you have your bars and beats on top over here, bar 1, bar 5, bar 9, and you have your time code, or rather your just minutes and seconds over here. You got 0, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, all the way up to 1 minute 10, etc., etc., etc. Right? Now, if I zoom in, watch what happens. You see how the divisions are getting smaller and smaller and smaller? It just infinitely divides. That's because it's on what's called an adaptive grid, right? Which is, where is this in? If I just right click, you'll see that the adaptive grid is enabled, and narrow is just one of the settings where you can set it to the small division that you want, right? So what that means is that as I zoom more and more in, the division will get smaller and smaller. So it'll go from quarter notes right now, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. These are quarter notes. If I zoom in, let me just zoom in from here. I have eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And if I zoom in again, I have 16th notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, right? From bar 1 to bar 2, you can have 16th notes, 8th notes, quarter notes, and half notes, right? I think that's fucking awesome because, one, it keeps you in that whole grid mentality, and when you're writing music, it's a godsend when you want to do that. But also, you also don't have to keep going back and forth, switching the grid to quarter note, 16th note, back to quarter note, then to 8th note. You don't have to keep switching it up. It's like just there, right? Now, if you wanted to, you can change it to a fixed grid, right? Go to quarter notes, and then no matter what you zoom in, zoom out to, it will always stay quarter notes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. No matter how much I zoom in, it stays quarter notes. So personally, I'm just going to right click and move back to adaptive grid, I'm sorry. So I personally like that. Now, in order to zoom in and out, if you're curious, it's the plus sign to zoom in and the minus sign to zoom out. Just makes so much more sense, right? Zoom in, zoom out. And remember, tab is to go between the two windows. All right, so we got the grid. You might also see that there's a little brace over here. Anybody from Logic, and I think maybe Fruity Loops World might know, but this is your loop brace. So if you have a loop brace set up, then what's going to happen is it's going to, and if you have this little button engaged, it's going to constantly loop that section. All right. You can actually tell also that the loop starts at bar 9, beat 1, and it goes for 1 bar, right? Bar 9, beat 1 goes for 1 bar. And you can change that to whatever you want there, or here, or here, right? Pretty cool, in my opinion. Pretty cool. All right. Next, we have a little follow button over here. So if we, let's say, if we zoom in right now and I hit play, the screen is staying still, but the cursor is moving ahead, right? Which is cool. And if that's what you want to see, great. Another way of viewing this is if you hit the follow button, and now the cursor will always remain in the middle of the playback screen or the edit screen, right? Again, different purposes for different, different utility, different tool for different purposes, right? It's really down to preference, but I think it's cool that you can actually do that. Right next to that, you have where your cursor is actually being placed. So right now my cursor is at bar 10, beat 1. Right now it's at bar 5, beat 1. Right? So you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Next, you have a play button, stop button, record button. These are pretty standard transport controls. I'm going to skip over these because these will make more sense when we get into more advanced stuff. But just to like quickly explain them, the plus sign is a MIDI overdub for the arrangement view, which if you want to overdub MIDI, you can do that. Next is automation. You're pretty familiar with this, but if you wanted to record automation in the arrangement view, that's how you would do it. The next is, I can't remember the name of it, re-enable automation. And once we get into automation, this will make sense, but you can actually write in automation and then temporarily disable it so you can hear it at a certain level of your choice and then re-enable it. Next is Midi Capture, which is it's always listening to MIDI notes and MIDI information. So if you played something and you're like, oh shit, I wish I recorded that, you can just click on this and it'll recapture it. And the final thing is the record button for the session view. And again, that's not going to make sense until I get further into it, but just know that that's what it does. All the way to the right, you've got your pencil tool, which is usually for drawing MIDI notes or for drawing automation, pretty standard. The button right next to that is kind of the cool thing where you can actually use your computer keyboard as a MIDI keyboard. So just to kind of show you a basic example, here's a Midi track, right? I can go to my sounds and just load up let's just do an ambient thing, just double click. And if I enable my computer keyboard and record enable this track, right? So I'm playing on my actual keyboard. This is pretty standard with a lot of DAWs. So if you are from Fruity Loops or Logic World, this shouldn't be such a big deal for you. But if you've been in Pro Tools World your whole life, this is a fucking huge deal. So there you go. Right next to that, you have this button called Key, right? This allows you to map keys from your computer keyboard to functions on the screen. So for example, suppose I didn't want to always go here and hit the record button, right? I wanted to map it to a short key, a hotkey of my own choice. You can create your own shortcuts right here and now. Press key, that opens up the key mapping. Click on the parameter you want to assign. So right now I want to assign the record button, so I'll click on that. And then I'm going to press the letter R on my keyboard. And you see, as soon as I did that, key R is now mapping to the global record button on the transport. And you can see that there's a little R over here. So now I can take it off key, right? And now when I press the letter R, it records. Pretty efficient, if I don't say so myself. Now, if you don't want to, if you want to get rid of anything, you just go back to your key mappings over here, click, and just press delete, and it's gone. But I think that's an extremely useful feature. So suppose you wanted to tap tempo, right? Instead of using your mouse key to try to figure that out, just do like you would in Pro Tools, right? Go to key, click on tap, press the letter T to create the mapping, press key again, and now I can tap my tempo on my keyboard. Anyway, I think that's fucking dope. Right next to that, you have a MIDI mapping. Now, this is exactly the same as the key mapping, but instead of using your computer keyboard, you can use a MIDI controller to move knobs on the screen. So I'm going to go back to the session view right now, just for our purposes. And if I click on MIDI, I can assign, basically, let me assign this reverb send to A. I'll click on that, and I'm just going to turn one of my knobs very slightly on my MIDI keyboard. I'll actually show you guys. So right here. And as soon as I touch it, the mapping gets created on the screen, right? So now I'm going to turn off MIDI, and watch what happens when I rotate this. Pretty cool, right? So you can easily map your MIDI keyboard to functions on the screen. Now, this is something that Pro Tools doesn't do very easily. Hannah had asked about this before, but I didn't really find an easy way to do it. You'd have to find a device that like specifically maps to certain things, and then you'd have to set up like Huey functions. So it's not as intuitive as this. I feel like this is a lot easier because you just choose the parameter, choose your knob, boom. So it's unfortunate that they don't have something simpler like this in Pro Tools, but it's pretty awesome that Ableton does have something like this. This actually makes creative decisions and creative processes way more fun as well, as you could probably imagine, right? Right next to that, you have your CPU usage, which will tell you, hey, is your computer about to blow up, right? Because the more plugins, the more devices, the more recording you're doing, the higher your CPU will be. Now, to the right of this, right, these two little squares, there's two little squares over here. That is your MIDI input and output detector. I don't know if they call it a detector specifically. Indicator. Okay. I guess I called it a detector, but it's an indicator. So all that means is if I am pressing my keys, is MIDI being detected? And in which case it is. So you can see that when I press my keys, there's a little flash going on up here on the top, which is for MIDI input. So it's receiving, Ableton is receiving MIDI data. This is awesome because like if you loaded up an instrument and you're playing and you're like, you can't hear anything, one, you might not have it record enabled, but two, maybe you're not even receiving MIDI data. So it's good to check that first. And if you're sending MIDI data out to like synthesizers and stuff, you can also map it, or sorry, you can also find out if it's detected or not, being indicated or detected or not. All right. Now the last thing that two things that I didn't go over yet is one, we have a little browser over here, which is equivalent to or very similar to the browser in Logic. But this is basically where you have your sounds, your samples, but it's also where you have your plugins and you have your audio effects and MIDI effects, right? So you can see you have under sounds, you have different instruments like guitars and pads and keys and synths and voice and winds. Under drums, I mean, come on, you know what that is, right? Drums. Instruments is actually where you find like your basic synthesizer, simpler and sampler. We'll get to that later. Audio effects is where you have built-in Ableton audio effects like EQs, modulators, pitch modulators, delay, reverb, utilities. Utilities is like tuners and stuff like that. MIDI effects is only for MIDI, and we'll get into that as well in a couple of days. Max for Live, we don't really get into, but if you're interested in designing your own plugins and stuff like that, definitely check out Max MSP. And you can connect it and integrate it with Ableton. Plugins is where all my third-party plugins is, so a lot of you probably see the Fab Filter stuff. Clips is where you can obviously, there you go, store clips. Samples is where you have some default single note samples, right? They're just one hits, really. Well, I guess not all of them. Most of them. Grooves we'll get into later. Templates we'll probably get into later. But you can probably decipher what templates means, right? All right. Now, what I'm going to do is... Oh, last thing. Right down at the bottom, you have a little area over here, which is either for your plugins to be viewed, right? So if I go into my audio effects and just load up a basic EQ8, see that it loads up at the bottom, but it's also where you can get your clip view, all right? Now you can alternate between these two ways, either by going to the bottom right, there's two different tabs. So just to like show you an example, I'm going to choose an audio track. I'm going to set my inputs, record enable, and just hello, 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 right? So you can see that your clip view is at the bottom over here. And if you go to the other tab, you can swap between the clip view and your plugin view. Now the shortcut for this is Shift Tab to swap between the two views. Really, really cool in my opinion. So Tab is to go between the session view and edit window. I'm sorry, session view and arrangement view. And Shift Tab is to go in between the clip view and the effects view. All right. So I'm gonna get rid of this. All right. So let's see, how far are we doing? All right, we're doing good on time. So what I want to do is first, I want to tell you, let's approach it this way. Let's use Ableton just like a standard DAW. So I'm not going to worry about the session view at all right? We'll get into that a little bit later, but for now, let's just talk about the arrangement view, right? There's a reason why it's called the arrangement view, but that won't make sense until maybe the second half of this class. So actually, before I get into that, is this a game? What am I doing here? YouTube recommended me this. Okay. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to file save live set. So I'm going to save the Ableton session in a location that is where I can find it. Okay. So I'm going to make a new folder for Ableton sessions, and I'm going to call it intro class. Now, just so that you guys can get an idea of what it looks like, Ableton sessions look like this, right? They're black folders with these little rectangles in there. It's a folder technically, but they're black and they have these little colorful rectangles, right? So unlike Pro Tools, you can pretty much distinguish what an Ableton session folder looks like. But just like Pro Tools, this is where all your data for reconstructing the session actually lives. So not only is it where the outline and skeleton of the session is, or the live set is what Ableton calls it, Ableton Live Set, ALS, but it's also where all your recordings live as well. So just good to know if you ever want to transfer a session, this folder is what you want to transfer, right? So let's go back to Ableton and let's use it like a regular DAW, right? So I'm going to select my MIDI track, which is the first track set up here. I'm going to go to my sounds, right? And then I'm going to choose, let's do synth rhythm. No, let's do, yeah, actually, let's do synth rhythmic. So you can see that when I click on synth rhythmic, there's a pull down menu where I can view all the different samples that I have, or rather the sounds that I have. These are all virtual instrument sounds that you can play with. Now, when you click on one, it plays the C3 value of that instrument. So if I click on the first one, right, it plays you a sample of what that instrument sounds like. Now, if you don't want to hear what the instrument sounds like, there's a little blue headphone right at the bottom of that screen. You can turn that off so that whenever you select an instrument, you don't really hear what it sounds like. But in this case, we do want to hear what it sounds like, so I'm going to turn that on. So I like that. So if I like that, I can either drag and drop it onto the MIDI track to load the instrument, or if I have the MIDI track selected already, I can just double click it and it loads onto that selected MIDI track. You can tell that it's loaded because at the bottom, where I told you the plugins are loaded, you can see that this one is loaded right up here. All right. Now, in order to actually get some sound, I have to record enable. The record enable is right next to the solo button, right? The S stands for solo. Now you might be wondering, well, where's the mute button? That's what these numbers are for. These yellow highlighted numbers. Ableton doesn't really go for the mute, unmute. It's rather, is the track enabled or disabled? So right now, when the track is highlighted, when the numbers are highlighted yellow, it's enabled. When you take them off, that's when they're muted or disabled. So make sure that they're always enabled if you want to hear everything. Obviously, you have your C for center, right? Panning left, panning right. And then you have your sends A and sends B that we already talked about, which are the same over here, right? But I'm going to get into the session view a little bit later. So record enable is right next to the solo button. So we hit record enable. And then I think we chose 180 as our tempo. But let's see what happens if we... So that might be too fast, so let's slow it down a little bit. All right, let's just do that. Something really simple, right? It's a really cool rhythmic pattern. So the instrument is actually doing everything for me. I'm only pressing 2 notes, so it's not really that impressive, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of what this is like. So let's go and record. Make sure our count off is set. Count in is 1 bar. Got everything set up. Let's fucking do it. Right? Pretty simple. And you can see I can already tell that I'm only holding 3 notes down. But if I click on this, I can press Shift Tab. And remember that clip view that I talked about. This is the clip view for this particular clip. Now remember, this is MIDI data. So you guys remember that MIDI is just digital information that can be used to trigger other sounds, lights, and various other things, right? So you can see that, yeah, it sounds like a fucking 80. That sounds like a video game right there, right? So you can see that the MIDI notes are all over here. And a couple of things to take note of. You can see that right over here in the clip section, it tells you the range of the notes that you played. So I played, the only notes that I played were C, E flat, F, and G, right? So the range that I was playing in was within C3 to G3. So it just lets you know. You can actually make it faster, make it slower, right? Pretty fast. You can reverse. You can legato, which is basically each note extends till the next note. So watch what happens. If I just reduce this, right? Let me just reduce these in size. When you press legato, after you select all of them, it makes sure that each note goes to the very beginning of the next note. I think that's pretty cool. All right. And duplicate, obviously you guys know what duplicate does, but there you go. So you have your MIDI notes here, you have your velocities here, just like in Pro Tools, just like the MIDI piano roll in Pro Tools. Now, in order to quantize these, you have to select all of them by either highlighting them all or by pressing Command A to highlight them all. Shift Command U is the shortcut to bring up the quantization menu. All right. Now, here is where you decide what do you want to quantize the tops of the notes to, or the ends of the notes to, and what grid do you want to quantize to. So in this case, I think I only did 1/8 notes, so I'm going to go to 1/8 notes, and I only want to quantize when I started the note, or when I pressed the key, so at the start. So hit OK. So now they're all quantized. If you didn't see that, I'm going to do it one more time. Right now, you can see that the start of the notes are a little off, right? A little off. But if I press Shift Command U, boom. And now if I do legato, they'll be perfect. Almost too perfect. All right. So the clip view is where you can start to manipulate your MIDI or audio data, right? And I've only shown you a couple of things, but obviously you guys will be playing around with a lot of these things and you'll understand what they do by using them. Next, what you might notice is that I played a imperfect loop, right? Because one how many bars did I play? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.5-ish. So that's not really conducive for doing a proper loop or making a beat, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this last note and delete it. But then you see this little bar right above the loop. You see the flag, this little triangle flag on both sides. If you drag this, I'm actually going to drag both of them because I not only want the loop, but I also want the start and stop markers to be accurate. So the bottom triangle flags are the start and stop markers, and the top ones are the loop brace. Loop brace is similar to this. But right now, I've set my loop brace for this particular clip. I've set it to 8 bars. So right now, if I wanted to, I can make this a loop and have it duplicate over and over and over again. Now, you guys might remember how to do this in Pro Tools. It's just Command D, right, if you select the clip. But that's not what I'm going to do here. What I'm going to do is, in the clip view itself, right, I'm going to go to this little option called Loop and click on it. So you see that the loop brace turned a solid yellow color now. What that means is, if you go back to the loop in the arrangement view, you can go to the top right corner where the loop ends, click, and drag it out, and it will duplicate over and over again, right? The little black marker indicates the start of the next loop. Okay? So that is your clip view. It's pretty awesome and very, very useful. Now, again, this is also where you can start to change the position of notes. Now, if you want to hear the note as you play it, as you move it, you can click on the little headphone sign over here, and now you can hear it as it does its thing. Another cool thing is if you have like many different notes being played, you can actually click on this little fold feature, which actually only shows you the notes that you've played, right? So you see that I'm only seeing C, E flat, F, G, right? I'm not seeing any of the notes in between. And it's just a cool way to kind of keep things consolidated. I don't usually use it for melodic instruments, but for drums and things like that, where sometimes, you know, the kick drum is here, the snare drum is there, the hi-hat's all the way over there on the keyboard. It's cool to fold it down so that you only view the things that you need to view, right? So let's go ahead and loop this out. This was an 8-bar loop. So let's do like a, sure, let's do 32 bars. Oh, that's 32 bars, yep. All right, so there you go. That's MIDI. Now, when you have a clip in the arrangement view, there's a couple of ways of editing it, right? Now, a MIDI clip can only be edited in 2 different ways, really. One, if you put your mouse where the bar on top of the clip is, that's where the name is, you can basically use it as a grabber tool to grab and move around the session. You can also go to the ends of that name and trim, just like in Pro Tools, right? And the bottom section is where you have your Selector Tool, if you wanted to select different regions. Now remember, if I did that, I now have 2 separate clips that I can manipulate on my own, right? On their own. So just something to know. Quick shortcut, if you have your cursor somewhere in the session and you want to take it all the way to the beginning, it's the home button on your extended keyboard. If you don't have that, I believe just pressing the stop button, yeah, takes it all the way to the back. To the top, sorry. So now, why don't we go ahead and add another instrument. So we got our MIDI. Let's add another one. Let's do bass, I guess. And let's... Fine, let's do that. Double click to load, record enable, and I want to make sure. All right, so I don't know if you noticed what just happened there, but essentially what I did was, I'm going to do it one more time. See, well, I wasn't actually recording what I was doing was I was just trying shit out. But sometimes when you're trying shit out, if you're creative, you actually discover stuff that you fucking love and you wish you had recorded. Cool thing about Ableton is that because it's always listening to MIDI, it has a little feature in here called Midi Capture. So let's just do that one more time, right? I'm just going to play it. So I'm like, oh my God, that was a fucking brilliant idea. Why didn't I fucking record it? I am such an idiot. Well, if you go to this little button over here, this little broken square, and you click, it was actually listening the whole time. Or was it? Yeah, government's listening, baby. So now I can actually go in here and start manipulating it the way I want to. So what I want to do is I actually don't want it to start on the E flat. I want to start on the C. A lot of the command keys are very similar to Pro Tools. So if you hold Option, click a note and drag it, it will duplicate the note. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I want it to start. Boom, boom. All right, and I want this to extend. Nope, start here. So this has to go here. Ah, yes. So this has to go more. So let's do this. Let's do boom. That has to go there. This. So what I'm essentially doing is that I'm making the loop the way I want it to go. So that's what I want the loop to be. This is a very important part of Ableton. You have to make sure that your loops are created perfectly. If you create odd timing loops, you're going to get really, really bad or brilliant, depending on how lucky you are, beats. But once you've created your loop correctly, you can right-click and crop the clip. And again, the thing you want to make sure is that it's either a perfect 4 or a perfect 8. Now, I'm not saying this if you're an advanced key songwriter and you know how to work with different time signatures and things looping and overlapping. I'm just saying if you're starting out, I would say start with your 4s and your 8-bar loops. Maybe your 16-bar loops if you can handle it. Because if you start doing 9 bars, 7 bars, 13 bars, it's going to go all out of whack. That's why I'm keeping it on the 4 and the 8. So we have our little bass line. We can select all the notes. Now, I also want to quantize this towards 8th notes, and I already set up the quantize menu to detect for 8th notes. So I don't have to reset the quantization division. So now the shortcut to quantize immediately without changing the menu is just Command U. And you saw them quantize right now. Shift Command U is only for when you want to change the quantization parameters. Command U is for when you want to quantize based on the previous setting of the quantization menu. Same as before, I'm going to hit loop, and then I'm going to drag this out, and now we have right? So suppose I wanted to add another MIDI instrument, right? The shortcut to add a MIDI track is Shift Command T. You can also do it by just right-clicking and say Insert MIDI Track. All right. So I don't know. What does this need? Maybe a lead. All right. Double-click. Record enable. Whatever. Doesn't really matter. Maybe that shouldn't loop. But if you wanted it to loop, again, you open up the MIDI clip, make sure... Man, why is it doing that? I thought you could do both at the same time. But anyway, make sure it's a perfect 8th bar. Crop clip, Command U. Anyway, maybe this should only come in halfway through. And then if we loop it, then maybe it will make a little bit more sense. Now, if you want to turn it down, like I said, you have your pan and you have your level right here. If you want to add reverb, again, you can do this in your session view or your arrangement view, but I'm just sticking here for now. You have your send to the reverb. And then, obviously, after all this, you got to add some drums, right? So Shift Command T to start a new MIDI track. Go to drums. Just choose like maybe a 909. Double click. Now this will start to make more sense. Now remember, this pattern that you hear when you play on it, that's just a sample of what the instrument sounds like. You actually have to perform it if you want to, use it. If you double click it, it loads onto the track. Now, I'm not sure if there's a way to get this sample into your session, but I haven't done that before. So record enable. And then you know the deal. Yeah, that should be better. I'll do that. Gotta take this shit more seriously. Sorry, guys. So there you go. We got some drum pattern. Again, I'm going to make it so that it's a perfect 8 bar and I don't have to really think about playing it over and over again. I'm going to get rid of this last note. Command A to select all. Command U to quantize, although I think because this is faster, it should be 16th notes. So there we go. Right click, crop clip. And now here's the thing. We don't really have any hi-hats, which is kind of a shame. So what you want to do is you want to use this little feature over here, which is the plus sign for overdubbing MIDI. Now this is similar to what we had in Pro Tools, if you remember. Watch what happens if I try to record some hi-hats right now. All right, so watch this. Right? It's overwriting what I already did, which is not what I want it to do. I want it to overdub, so I press the plus sign, and now I record on top. Right? So that way, you keep the original beat underneath, but you also get to add the hi-hats on top of it. Now, I only want to quantize these hi-hats, so I'm only going to select those. And I wonder if it's actually 30-second notes, because I did play some as you guys say. And then hit the loop, extend that shit out, and there you go. Right? So there you go. You got 4 simple MIDI tracks set up and ready to go. Now, one reason why this is called the arrangement view is because you can now take your loops, right? You have 32 bars worth of loops, and you can arrange it. And arranging basically means giving songs like a flow and like a structure to them. So having like a start to a middle to a climax to an end, right? So for example, I can maybe start with just okay, you know what? I'll show you something cool. So let's say the first 8 bars should just be the little ARP thing, right? Now, the bass and the drums should come in at the same time. So maybe that should come in the 16th. But what I want to do is I want to take my drum loop over here, Command E cuts the clip into 2 separate clips. All right? Command E. So I just selected, press Command E, and that cuts it into 2 separate clips. And now they're their own entities. So what I'm going to do is in the first clip, I'm going to delete all the kick and drums. And when the kick drum drops, that's when the bass comes in. And maybe this guy we should save till the very end. I'm not really happy with that one, but you get the idea. So now you have something of a structure, right? Has an intro. It kind of establishes the motif of the song or whatever, and then you can slowly start to build it. And then, fucking kick drum, baby. Okay. So it's called the arrangement view because you can start arranging your song. Pretty cool, right? I like it. So yeah, and that's how you do MIDI in Ableton, right? Now, another thing that I could mention is if you wanted to say overdub something. So for example, I'm not really happy with this melody, right? Let's see if we can change this to something else. So I'm going to record enable this, and I'm going to change it to something simpler. Sounds like some fucking Super Mario, like, I guess I was playing the Sonic Genesis games, right? So I guess I deserve it. Let's go from here. So, okay, suppose I wanted to record here. Now, one way you could record, instead of like choosing your place, hitting record, etc., you can set up your loop brace to the section where you want to record. To say I want to just record these last 8 bars, right? Then you can set up your loop brace to either loop that section over and over again, and you can choose to overdub them, or you can set up a pre and post roll. I'm just going to set up a little pre, if that's okay. Oh. No, let's not do that. Why is it not doing this? What am I missing? Oh, okay. Let me see if I can do this correctly. Let me record first, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so I fucked up the next part, right? So what I can do is I can make sure that I choose the section that I want to have overdub, and then if I hit record, it's not going to record until I get to the loop brace. Check it out. Right? So what happened was, even though I had hit record, it was only going to record once it got to the actual loop brace. So it's really a way of punching in, really. That's what it's used for. So anyway, I didn't like that. But you guys get the idea, hopefully. This loop brace can be used as a way to punch in and punch out of MIDI recording and audio recording. So let's try something easier. Synth. Let's just do with piano, right? So let's go here. So if I set the loop up here, if I hit record, it's not going to record until I get to the actual loop, right? So it's a cool way to punch in. Right? So it's a cool way to record. Now, if I wanted to punch in a certain part, I could say, choose my loop, brace, and then hit record and hear the pre-roll. I can hear it, but it's not recording until it reaches the actual loop brace. All right? You have to make sure it's off of loop or else it'll keep looping over and over again. But if you set up a pre-roll and a post-roll, then it'll play before and after your loop brace without overwriting anything. Okay. Now, if you have two separate clips, you can glue them together by pressing the shortcut for loop. I'm sorry, for gluing, which I think is Command J. Yeah. Command J basically combines and glues different clips together. There you go. So that's MIDI for you. Now, you can also record audio pretty easily in Ableton, right? So if you have an audio interface and you're allowed to hook up a microphone and use it, you have to create an audio track. Why? Because, well, yeah, you know. And then right here, and I'm going to actually use the session view for this, but in your audio track, it's not inputs and outputs anymore. It's audio from and audio to. Audio from is input, audio to is output. So you can see that on my audio track, its audio is coming from an external device, which is my interface. I've set it to input 3, which is what my microphone is. Now I can either monitor the input, auto monitor, or turn it off. So if I choose input monitor, you will hear 2 of me. Hello, there's 2 of me right now. Did you know that? Auto is just like your record enable in Pro Tools, where if you are recording, you will hear yourself, but otherwise you'll only hear what's been recorded. In is like your input monitor in Pro Tools, where you will hear yourself directly input monitored without hearing whatever you've recorded, and off is completely off if you don't want to hear yourself. which makes sense, right? So let's actually choose in. And I want to try something just real quick because sometimes I forget, but if I turn this off, yes. Okay, so now you're not hearing me directly through my UAD, you're hearing me through Ableton, through the input monitor. So that way, if I had my reverb, right? So what I did was I sent a copy of this to send A, right? This determines how much of the copy is going to send A, and send A is your reverb over here, all right? So send, and then the other one is delay. Right? And you can actually go in and modify the plugins if you want to. So like for delay, for some reason they set it to 3. I like it to be 4. And I want to turn the feedback up. Wow, you can really dance. You guys know where that? I will make an opera singer. That's hilarious. All right, so now in order to record, it's very simple. You hit record enable. You can either hit it here, test, or you can hit it here. It's the same thing. All right, so let's see what actually goes with this. So you can just record that. Let's start with a kick drum. I'm gonna hit record. One. Pretty easy, right? So now, if I hit play, you see how you can't really hear you can't really hear what I recorded because I'm on input mode. But as soon as I turn this to auto, my shitty bullshit ass fucking voice. Right. So now, what do you do? I'm going to do it again. Actually, no, I'm not going to do it again. You know what? We're here, so we might as well fucking do it. Let's record that again, but a double take. So basically, when you do vocals and you want to do like a choir kind of thing, you want to record multiple performances of the same melody line so that you can pan them out and create something bigger, right? So let's just record the same thing, but a different performance. Different performances of the same melody line. So let's do that again. I forgot the pitch. Forgot the pitch. Sorry. Command T for new audio track. Sorry. Command T is for a new audio track. Now that you have the same performance, you can pan them hard left and right. And then if you know the harmony, na da la da, I think. I don't know. So you want to record the harmony of that, so you just do that real quick. I'm not going to spend too much time because this is kind of boring now. Toast, 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 la. So let's do that. 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 La. So there you go. 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 I'm not gonna double take them. I'm not gonna go ahead and double take it just to save time. But there you go. You have some sort of melody. All right, so there you go. You got some audio, you got some MIDI, and you're basically treating this just like you would Pro Tools, right? Now, just like before, when you had the MIDI clips that you can play with, you can go into audio clips and mess around with them. So for example, I'm not gonna get too much into this, but a very, very simple thing you can do is you can mess with gain, right? You can turn these clips up and down in gain, double click to reset. You can also change pitch. So a really cool thing you could do is you can create multiple audio tracks, hold Option to drag them down, and then what you can do is you can actually make more, not really layers, but you could fuck around and like maybe create the octave, right? So if I went to pitch and I went like, I believe it's 12 semitones down, that should be the octave. Let's hear it. What? So 12 is an octave. Luke, come to the dark side. So if you're wondering what I'm doing with these triangles are your faders for volume. I should have mentioned that. But these are your volume, this is your pan, this is your mute, solo, record enable. Right? So now, not only can you fuck around with your audio clips, but well, okay, so one thing is you can't edit in here. The editing has to be done over here if you want to do any kind of editing. Now with audio clips, it's different than MIDI clips slightly because yes, you can still select using the bottom section and delete. You can still grab and move them around at the top, right? So boom. And you can still trim on the sides, which is all very valid. But the additional thing you can do is, you see these little squares on the corners? This is your fade outs and fade ins. You can also curve them the way you want them, right? Pretty cool. It's also where your crossfades exist. So if you had two clips that meet each other, you would actually just drag one of the clips, fade to the other one, and that creates a crossfade, right? So that's where your difference is. Because in MIDI, you can't really fade in MIDI and fade out MIDI. That doesn't make any sense technically. So you do that with audio clips. Now, the last thing that you might want to do is do like a very rough mix of this. Now, I already told you that in your session view is where you can see these faders and pans and sends. You can see them here too, but it's not as intuitive. It's also true that you can select a track and add your audio effects. So for example, if I went to my vocals, let's say this one. If I went to my vocals, selected the track and used an EQ, maybe EQ 8, you start EQing, right? Ugh. That's how bad I am. And here's the cool thing. If you want to copy and paste plugins with settings, you select the plugin, right? This is the plugin down here. You can press Command C to copy, I believe. Go to the next track, click on the effects area, Command V. Very, very, very easy. Plugins work exactly the same like Pro Tools. You can change your settings. You can bypass them by clicking the yellow button to disable them and enable them. You can also save presets over here, and then we'll get into more advanced stuff like creating racks down the line. But this is a really cool way where you can just start copying and pasting plugins pretty smoothly. Maybe you want to add like a flanger effect to your drums. I don't know why, but fuck it. Go to your modulators. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's wait, no, it is modulators, isn't it? I usually like this specific thing that I'm looking for. Pitch and modulation. Sorry. Phaser and flanger. It's pretty cool. So again, your plugins get loaded up down at the bottom. So if you can see the vocals, we have an EQ. If I was to add another plugin, like say a compressor, double click, and it loads the compressor right next to it. Change the settings. You can also change the order by just clicking and dragging the plugins, right? Click and drag, and there's a little bar. You can crush the shit out of it if you want to, although it's already pretty compressed as it is. Another cool thing is that you can copy and paste multiple plugins really fast. So if I had an EQ and compressor, I select them both by just clicking on one, holding Shift, clicking on the other. Command C to copy. Go to my next track. Suppose this was empty. Command V. Boom. Really easy. And finally, I'm going to wrap it up real quick, but the one thing that I think a lot of you guys will appreciate is that suppose you're like, you know what, this is dope, but I wish it was like 5 BPM faster. I'm like, oh my God, do I have to record this shit again? No, sir. You just turn up your tempo and it goes up with it. And there you go. So we just learned how to use Ableton, essentially how you would use a regular DAW, right? You can go into your arrangement view, which is very similar to your edit view. Choose whatever type of track, either it's a MIDI track or an audio track. Load an instrument from the sounds, right? Load an instrument, start playing and recording just like you would in your regular DAW. Then you can add audio just like you would in your regular DAW, right? And record exactly like Pro Tools. Then you can actually go into the individual clips at the bottom and create proper loops. You can create legato effects. You can create different melodies, different notes. If you wanted to pick and change them, you can change velocities. Let's see, if you go to drums. So again, this is an example of where in drums you have different keys all mapped out on the left, but you're only using kick drum and hi-hat. So if you press fold, now I'm only viewing the kick drum and hi-hat, which is just very, very useful. And I don't think I even use this bass drum, so I don't even need that shit. Right? Kick, drum, hi-hat. Very, very easy to view it, in my opinion. All right. There's some more stuff that I could get into, but I feel like I've gone on for quite a while. But that's just because Ableton is dope, and whenever I get into Ableton, I feel like having some fun. So let's take it back to Zoom real quick.